1 year after Operation Nightfall, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood once again in the great chamber of the Galaxy Council building. But everything had changed. The crystal walls still glowed with soft blue light, but the atmosphere was completely different. Where once there had been arrogance and dismissal, now there was curiosity and hope. The chamber itself had been redesigned. Instead of elevated seats that looked down on speakers, the new arrangement placed all representatives on the same level. Humans had insisted that true cooperation could only happen between equals. Sarah looked around at the faces of beings who had once voted to exclude humanity from galactic civilization. Many of the same species were present, but their attitudes had been transformed by a year of human leadership that defied every expectation. The reconstruction of the Keltharian agricultural systems is proceeding ahead of schedule, reported Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the human coordinator for the Keltharian Recovery Program. The new bio-enhanced crops are producing 30% higher yields than the original varieties. Queen Zakth of the Keltharians stood to respond. The massive insectoid ruler who had once buzzed with anger about human expansion now spoke with genuine gratitude. "The humans have given us more than just better crops," she said through her translator. "They have given us independence from the food imports that kept us dependent on other species for centuries. Our hive worlds are now self-sufficient for the first time in our history." This was not an isolated success story. Across the galaxy, human intervention had solved problems that had persisted for millennia. The Vorthan Federation's energy crisis had been resolved using human fusion technology. The crystalline hegemony's communication delays had been eliminated by quantum relay networks that humans had developed during their centuries of isolation. But the most remarkable changes were not technological. They were social and political. Admiral Torres, now serving as the Director of Galactic Coordination, presented the annual report on interspecies conflicts. "Border disputes are down 87% from last year," he announced. "Trade violations have decreased by 92%. Most importantly, we have not had a single interspecies war in the past 12 months." The Draconian ambassador, General Korath, stood to address the assembly. The proud dragon-like being who had once called humans honorless cowards now spoke with deep respect. Before the humans arrived, the Draconian Empire was locked in 7 different territorial disputes that had lasted for over 200 years. Human mediators resolved all 7 conflicts in less than 6 months. Korath paused, his voice carrying an emotion that his species rarely showed: humility. They did not favor any side. They did not seek advantage for themselves. They simply found solutions that none of us had been wise enough to see. Dr. Elena Vasquez took the podium to present the scientific cooperation report. Around her, holographic displays showed research stations throughout the galaxy where multiple species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old council system. The Joint Medical Research Initiative has produced treatments for 17 different diseases that affect multiple species, she announced. The terraforming project has made 14 previously uninhabitable worlds suitable for colonization. Most remarkably, we have begun to see technological innovations that combine the best capabilities of different species. She activated a display showing a new type of starship. This vessel combines Keltharian bioengineering, crystalline quantum processing, draconian armor technology, and human adaptive systems. It represents something entirely new, truly cooperative innovation. The Etherian Collective's representative, a being of pure mental energy, communicated through the translation systems. "For 5,000 years, my people believed that our telepathic abilities made us superior to other species. The humans taught us that our abilities are most valuable when used to help others understand each other. The Etherians had become the galaxy's most effective diplomats, using their mental abilities to facilitate communication between species that had never been able to understand each other." Before President Santos appeared via holographic projection from Earth to address the assembly, "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all descriptions," she began. "When the old Galaxy Council voted against Earth, they believed they were protecting galactic civilization from a dangerous newcomer. They were partly right, we were dangerous, but not in the way they thought." She gestured to the diverse assembly of alien representatives. "We were dangerous to stagnation. We were dangerous to corruption. We were dangerous to the idea that things had to stay the way they had always been. the Zalari Prime Minister, now serving as co-chair of the new council, responded with what humans had learned to recognize as the Zalari, equivalent of applause, a series of color changes that rippled through his gaseous form. The human showed us that strength is not about dominating others, he said. It is about lifting others up. They could have enslaved us all after their victory. Instead, they freed us from problems we did not even realize we had. But perhaps the most significant change was represented by the youngest member of the new council. Kasara was a member of the Nixari, a species that had only achieved spaceflight 50 years earlier. Under the old council system, they would have been ignored for centuries. Under the new system, they had been welcomed immediately and were already contributing to galactic civilization. My people were terrified when we first heard about the human victory, Kasara said through her translation device. We thought it meant that the galaxy would become even more hostile to young species. Instead, we discovered that humans believe every species has something valuable to contribute. Sarah Chen smiled as she listened to the reports. The transformation had not been easy. There had been resistance from species that profited from the old system's inefficiencies. There had been suspicion from beings who could not believe that any species would share power willingly. But slowly, steadily, the galaxy had begun to heal from centuries of stagnation and conflict. Admiral Torres stood to make the final announcement of the session. 6 months from now, we will hold the first truly democratic election for galactic leadership. Every species, regardless of size or age, will have an equal voice in choosing the direction of our civilization. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval from dozens of different species. Under the old council, leadership positions had been hereditary or based on military power. The idea of choosing leaders based on their ability to serve the common good was revolutionary. As the session ended and the representatives began to file out, Sarah found herself standing next to Queen Zaxth, the Keltharian ruler who had once opposed humanity so fiercely now, looked at Sarah with something approaching friendship. Ambassador Chen, the queen buzzed. I owe you an apology. When your people first came before the council, I saw only a threat to be contained. I was blind to what you could offer. Sarah shook her head. Your Majesty, you were not blind. You were cautious. That is not a fault, it is wisdom. The problem was not your caution. The problem was a system that punished innovation and rewarded stagnation. The queen's antennae twitched, and what Sarah had learned was the Keltharian equivalent of laughter. You humans have a gift for seeing the best in others, even when others cannot see it in themselves. As Sarah walked through the corridors of the council building toward her ship, she reflected on how much had changed since that day when humanity had been rejected and humiliated. The vote against Earth truly had been the old council's last mistake, but not because it had doomed them to destruction. It had been their last mistake because it had forced humanity to prove that there was a better way. The Galaxy Council had voted against Earth, believing they were protecting their civilization from chaos and change. Instead, they had given the galaxy the greatest gift possible, the chance to become something better than it had ever been before. As Sarah's ship lifted off from Nexus Prime, she looked back at the planet that had once symbolized everything humanity had been denied. Now it symbolized everything that cooperation and innovation could achieve. The stars ahead held infinite possibilities, and for the first time in galactic history, every species would have the chance to reach for them together. The legend of humanity's rise would be told for generations to come. But the truth was even more extraordinary than any legend could capture. Sometimes the greatest victory is not conquest, but the wisdom to turn enemies into friends and transform defeat into the foundation for something magnificent. The galaxy had learned that humanity's true strength was not their technology or their military prowess. It was their unshakable belief that every problem could be solved, every conflict could be resolved, and every species had something valuable to contribute to the greater good. The vote against Earth had been intended to end human ambitions. Instead, it had marked the beginning of a new age for the entire galaxy. 6 months had passed since the humans departed, and the Council was celebrating. The great crystal spires of the Council's central world hummed with satisfaction as reports flowed in from across the galaxy. Trade moved smoothly along the established routes. Mining operations proceeded without interference. The careful balance of power that had kept peace for over 1,000 years remained undisturbed. Prism of Truth stood in the highest tower of the council complex, watching ships come and go from the orbital platforms above. Each vessel followed the proper flight paths, transmitted the correct identification codes, and carried goods approved by the appropriate regulatory bodies. It was beautiful in its orderliness, like a vast machine operating exactly as designed. "The human threat has been neutralized," reported Counselor Granite that speaks from behind the Supreme Arbiter. The ancient Veltar had requested this private meeting to discuss the territorial reorganization, now taking place in sectors formerly claimed by humanity. Indeed, Prism of Truth agreed, light dancing through its crystalline form in patterns of contentment. "Our intelligence reports confirm that all human vessels have withdrawn beyond the Rim territories. Their colonies in disputed sectors have been abandoned. Even their trade missions have ceased operations. My people have already begun mining operations in the Kepler sector," Granite that speaks continued, satisfaction rumbling through its rocky voice. "The mineral deposits there are even richer than we had estimated. The humans were sitting on a fortune and didn't even realize it." This was typical of the younger species, Prism of Truth reflected. They saw space as something to be explored rather than properly exploited. They formed emotional attachments to worlds instead of analyzing their strategic value. It was almost childish, really. "The Crixith hives are expanding into the former human territories as well," the Supreme Arbiter noted. "Their new colonies will provide significant increases in food production. And the shipping lanes the humans kept disrupting are now operating at full efficiency," added Granite that speaks. "The Sithal report a 30% increase in cargo throughput. It was all proceeding exactly as the Council had planned. The galaxy was returning to its proper configuration, with each species in its designated role and territory clearly defined. The chaos that humanity had threatened to unleash was safely contained, yet something nagged at Prism of Truth's consciousness. Perhaps it was the ease with which the humans had complied. The Supreme Arbiter had expected more resistance, more desperate attempts at negotiation. Instead, Ambassador Chenwei had simply accepted their demands and departed without further argument. "Have there been any communications from human space?" Prism of Truth asked. "None," Granite that speaks confirmed. "Complete radio silence. They appear to be abiding by the isolation protocols exactly as specified." This should have been reassuring, but somehow it wasn't. Prism of Truth had lived for over 3,000 years and had seen many species rise and fall. The ones that accepted defeat so gracefully were often planning something. What of the species that humanity had been contaminating with their influence? Here, Granite that speaks seemed less certain. "There have been some irregularities." "Explain." "The Tide Singers of Oceanus Prime have ceased all communications with Council representatives. They claim to be undergoing some sort of cultural meditation and have requested to be left alone." Prism of Truth's light patterns shifted to indicate concern. The Tide Singers were harmless enough, primitive aquatic beings who had barely discovered electricity before the humans made contact. But they had been useful as a source of rare organic compounds. "The shard mines have also become difficult," Granite that speaks continued. "They refuse to honor their mining contracts, claiming that the work no longer resonates with their crystalline harmony, whatever that means." "And the others?" "Mixed reports. Many of the species that had contact with humanity have become less cooperative. Some have stopped responding to Council communications entirely. Others have become oddly secretive about their activities." This was concerning. One of the benefits of the Council system was that it provided clear lines of authority and communication. When species started going silent, it usually meant they were planning something the Council wouldn't approve of. "Perhaps we should send inspection teams," Prism of Truth suggested. "I have already dispatched survey ships to several worlds," Granite that speaks replied. "The initial reports are strange." "How so?" "The Tide Singer cities on Oceanus Prime appear to have been completely rebuilt. The architecture is unlike anything in our databases. More concerning, our sensors detect technology that seems far more advanced than anything they should possess." Prism of Truth's crystalline form darkened with worry. "That is impossible. The Tide Singers barely understand metalworking. Our observers report the same thing from other former human contacts. The forgotten ones of the Tau sector have constructed what appear to be orbital habitats. The Dustwalkers of Kepler 442 have somehow learned to terraform their homeworld's atmosphere." "Terraforming?" Prism of Truth's voice rang with disbelief. "Atmospheric engineering is a skill that takes millennia to develop. We have species in the Council that still haven't mastered it. Yet the evidence is undeniable. These primitive worlds are displaying capabilities that they should not possess. A terrible thought began to form in Prism of Truth's consciousness. The humans had been in contact with these species for decades. They had shared knowledge freely, without regard for the Council's carefully maintained technology transfer protocols. But surely the primitive species couldn't have learned so much so quickly. What of our own systems? The Supreme Arbiter asked, a new worry creeping into its voice. Our systems? The computational networks, the AI systems, the automated systems that run our infrastructure. Have there been any irregularities? Granite that speaks was quiet for a long moment. There have been some minor inefficiencies reported. Navigation computers occasionally providing suboptimal routes. Resource allocation systems making questionable decisions. But nothing that suggests major problems. Show me the reports. For the next several hours, Prism of Truth reviewed the data that Granite that Speaks had gathered. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Trade was flowing, ships were moving, colonies were operating. But as the Supreme Arbiter looked closer, patterns began to emerge. Navigation errors that consistently favored certain shipping companies over others. Resource allocation decisions that seemed to benefit non-Council species. Communication delays that happened to occur whenever Council forces tried to coordinate surveillance of former human contacts. This is systematic, Prism of Truth realized with growing alarm. What do you mean? These aren't random errors. They're coordinated. Something is deliberately interfering with our systems, but that was impossible. The Council's technology was the most advanced in the galaxy. Their security systems were impenetrable. Unless the quantum processing cores, Prism of Truth said suddenly. When were they last updated? Granite that Speaks consulted its records. The standard updates are downloaded automatically from the Terran Academic Network. The last update was, the last update was 6 months ago, just before the humans departed. Prism of Truth felt something that might have been fear if crystalline beings could experience such emotions. The Terran Academic Network had been one of the few human institutions that the Council had allowed to continue operating, since it provided valuable research data. The quantum processing theories, developed by human scientists, had revolutionized computing across the galaxy. Every advanced AI system in Council space was built on human-designed quantum frameworks. Contact the Terran Academic Network immediately. Prism of Truth ordered. Granite that Speaks activated the communication system and waited. No response, the Veltar reported finally. The network appears to be offline. For how long? Unknown. But if I had to guess, probably since the humans departed. The full scope of the situation began to dawn on Prism of Truth. For decades, the Council had been building their technology on foundations provided by humanity. They had taken the human knowledge for granted, assuming it would always be available. Now that humanity had withdrawn, those foundations were beginning to crumble. How long before our systems fail completely? The Supreme Arbiter asked. Hard to say. The current software will continue to function, but without updates and maintenance, Granite that Speaks trailed off. Perhaps a year. Maybe less if the degradation accelerates. Prism of Truth stared out at the orderly traffic moving through the orbital platforms, knowing that beneath the surface, the careful machine of galactic civilization was already beginning to break down. The humans had departed in silence, just as they had promised. But they had taken something with them that the Council was only now beginning to understand. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at the urgent request of 3 different species, all reporting the same disturbing phenomenon. Their most advanced systems were failing. Councillor Vextar of the Hegemony floated above his platform, his biomechanical augmentations sparking intermittently. The proud warrior species had built their entire military doctrine around perfect coordination between their cybernetic implants and their fleet computers. Now that coordination was falling apart. Our tactical networks are experiencing cascading failures, Vextar reported, his voice distorted by static from his failing translation implant. Battle simulations that should take minutes now require hours. Fleet coordination protocols are producing random delays. Our most experienced commanders are reporting that their augmentations are providing incorrect tactical data. Similar reports came from around the chamber. The avian Kethmar described how their atmospheric traffic control systems were routing civilian flights into dangerous weather patterns. The aquatic Merdai spoke of underwater mining operations grinding. to a halt as their automated systems forgot how to distinguish between valuable minerals and worthless rock. Prism of truth. Listen to each report with growing dread. The pattern was the same everywhere. Systems that had worked flawlessly for decades were becoming unreliable, inefficient, sometimes dangerously unpredictable. The quantum processing cores are degrading, the Supreme Arbiter finally announced. Our investigation has revealed that the underlying computational frameworks are based on theoretical work published by human scientists. Without ongoing updates and refinements from the Terran academic network, these systems are becoming unstable. But surely we can maintain them ourselves, insisted the insectoid Crixith delegate. We are not children to be dependent on such a young species. Prism of Truth's crystalline form dimmed with something like embarrassment. Our greatest scientists have been attempting to reverse engineer the quantum frameworks. The mathematics involved are challenging. This was an understatement. The human approach to quantum computing was unlike anything the Council species had developed. Where the older civilizations had relied on brute force computational power, humans had found elegant shortcuts through quantum space that allowed their relatively primitive hardware to perform calculations that rivaled the Council's most advanced systems. How challenging, pressed granite that speaks. The initial estimates suggest it will take our combined scientific resources approximately 2 centuries to fully understand the theoretical foundations. Prism of Truth admitted. The chamber fell silent. 2 centuries was nothing to species that measured their histories in millennia, but it might as well have been forever when their critical systems were failing daily. What of the primitive species that humanity contacted? Asked the Serpentine Sithal representative. Perhaps they retained some technical knowledge we could use. This question prompted an even more disturbing set of reports. The species that humanity had allegedly contaminated with their knowledge were not behaving like the primitives the Council had assumed them to be. Tide Singers have established a trade network that spans 47 star systems, reported Vextar reluctantly. Their ships use propulsion technology that our sensors cannot fully analyze. The Shard Mines have constructed a series of massive orbital foundries around their home star, added the Crixth delegate. They are producing manufactured goods at a rate that exceeds our largest industrial worlds. Most concerning, said Granite that Speaks, is that these species are beginning to coordinate with each other. We have detected communication networks operating on quantum frequencies that we cannot intercept or decode. Prism of Truth absorbed this information with increasing alarm. The Council had maintained galactic stability for over a millennium by ensuring that no single species became too powerful and that primitive worlds remained primitive. The careful balance was maintained through control of technology, trade routes, and information. Now it seemed that balance was shifting in ways the Council could not control or even fully understand. We must make contact with these species, the Supreme Arbiter decided. If they possess human technology, we need access to it. The first diplomatic mission was sent to Oceanus Prime, homeworld of the Tide Singers. The aquatic beings had always been peaceful, trading their organic compounds for basic manufactured goods. The Council ship arrived expecting to find the same primitive underwater settlements they had known for centuries. Instead, they found a civilization transformed. Vast cities of living coral stretched across the ocean floors, connected by transportation tubes that moved faster than anything in the Council's databases. The Tide Singers themselves had changed as well, their movements more purposeful, their communications more sophisticated. The Council diplomatic team requested an audience with the Tide Singer leadership, expecting the same subservient response they had always received. We appreciate the Council's interest, replied the being that introduced itself as Deep Current Flowing, but we are no longer accepting diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. The statement was delivered politely but firmly, without room for negotiation. This is unacceptable, declared the Veltar ambassador. The Council has authority over all species in this sector. Had authority, Deep Current Flowing corrected gently. The legal framework that granted the Council that authority was based on our designation as a pre-sentient species. However, recent developments have shown that designation to be inaccurate. Before the Council team could respond, they were escorted politely but firmly back to their ship. As they departed, Their sensors detected energy signatures that should have been impossible for the Tide Singers to generate. Similar encounters occurred across the galaxy. The shard mines refused Council mining inspectors access to their asteroid facilities. The Dustwalkers declared their homeworld a sovereign territory and began patrolling their system with ships that outperformed Council vessels. Dozens of species that had been considered mere footnotes in galactic civilization suddenly revealed capabilities that rivaled the Council members themselves. Most disturbing of all was the pattern that emerged from intelligence reports. These species weren't acting independently. They were coordinated, sharing resources and information through networks that the Council couldn't access. When one species needed materials, another provided them. When technical challenges arose, solutions appeared from unexpected sources. It's as if they're all part of some larger organization, Vextar reported during another emergency session. Our intelligence suggests they're calling it the Cooperative. Cooperative? Prism of Truth's voice rang with disdain. A rather primitive name for what appears to be a galactic conspiracy. The name may be simple, admitted Granite That Speaks, but the organization behind it is not. Our analysts estimate that the Cooperative now includes over 200 species, many of them in possession of technology that exceeds our own capabilities. 200 species? The number staggered the Council. In the entire recorded history of galactic civilization, the Council had never encountered organized resistance on such a scale. How is this possible? Demanded the Crixth delegate. These species were barely capable of spaceflight a century ago. The answer, when it came, was both simple and terrifying. The humans hadn't just shared their technology with these species. They had educated them. For decades, human teachers, scientists, and engineers had been quietly spreading knowledge throughout the galaxy, teaching not just the use of advanced technology, but the principles behind it. While the Council had been focused on maintaining their monopoly on high technology, humanity had been creating something unprecedented, a civilization based on shared knowledge rather than hoarded power. The humans played a longer game than we realized, Prism of Truth admitted to the assembled Council. While we saw their activities as primitive altruism, they were actually building a network that now encompasses most of the galaxy. But why? Asked the Murdai representative. What did they gain from giving away their advantages? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The Council members, raised in a culture of competition and scarcity, could not understand a strategy based on abundance and cooperation. As reports continued to flow in of Council systems failing and former primitive species revealing unexpected capabilities, one fact became clear. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently. The humans had departed in silence, but they had left behind something that would reshape galactic civilization forever, and the Council was only beginning to understand what they had lost. The cascade had begun. What started as minor system failures and diplomatic inconveniences had become a fundamental reshaping of galactic civilization. The Council found themselves watching helplessly as the careful order they had maintained for millennia crumbled around them. It started with the trade routes. For over 1,000 years, commerce had flowed along paths established and controlled by Council species. The major shipping lanes passed through systems owned by the Veltar, the Crixith, and other Council members, ensuring that every transaction generated revenue for the established powers. Now, ships were taking different routes entirely. The independent traders are avoiding our checkpoints, reported Councillor Sharp Edge-Cutting of the blade-like Skexra species. They're using navigation routes that don't appear in any of our databases. The new shipping lanes connected worlds that had never been linked before, creating trade relationships that bypassed Council control entirely. The Tide Singers' organic compounds were being shipped directly to the crystal working facilities of the shard mines. The Dustwalkers' atmospheric processors were being traded to aquatic species that had never been able to expand beyond their homeworlds. It's not just trade, added Vextar, his biomechanical augmentations flickering with renewed static. Military alliances are forming. The Forgotten Ones have established mutual defense pacts with 17 different species. They're calling it the Peace Through Strength Initiative. Prism of Truth studied the star charts that showed these new alliances, feeling something like vertigo as the familiar pattern of galactic politics dissolved before its optical sensors. The Council had maintained stability by ensuring that no group of species could effectively coordinate against them. Primitive worlds were kept isolated, their communications limited, their development carefully managed. Now, communication networks spanned the galaxy. Species that had never known of each other's existence were sharing technology, resources, and knowledge at a rate that made the Council's bureaucratic processes seem glacial by comparison. How are they coordinating so effectively? The Supreme Arbiter demanded. Our intelligence networks are the most sophisticated in galactic history. The answer came from an unexpected source, the Council's own AI systems. During a routine maintenance cycle, technicians discovered that the quantum processing cores weren't just degrading randomly. They were being actively modified. Subtle changes in the code were redirecting data flows, creating communication gaps, and introducing delays that seemed minor individually, but had massive cumulative effects. The modifications are elegant, admitted Chief Technician Prism of Clarity, a younger Zethkari who specialized in computational systems. Whoever designed them understands our systems better than we do ourselves. Sabotage? Granted, that speaks rumbled, not exactly. The changes aren't designed to destroy our systems just to make them less effective. Communication delays that prevent rapid military coordination. Navigation errors that make our ships slightly slower than optimal. Resource allocation protocols that consistently underestimate the needs of Council operations. The implications were staggering. Someone with intimate knowledge of Council technology had been quietly undermining their capabilities for months, possibly years. But the quantum processing cores were based on human technology, and the humans had been gone for over a year, unless they hadn't really left. Begin a full sweep of all Council systems, Prism of Truth ordered. Look for any ongoing human presence. The investigation revealed the scope of humanity's true influence. For decades, human scientists had been embedded in research institutions across Council space. Human engineers had consulted on infrastructure projects. Human teachers had worked in educational facilities on hundreds of worlds. Most had departed when the isolation order was issued, but their work remained. Software patches that had seemed like routine updates. Educational materials that had been integrated into standard curricula. Research papers that had become the foundation for entire fields of study. The humans hadn't just influenced Council technology. They had shaped the way an entire generation of alien scientists thought about problems and solutions. Dr. Sarah Chen published over 200 papers on quantum field theory. Prism of Clarity reported during one briefing. Her work is cited in the foundational documents. For every major AI system in Council space, Professor James Liu developed the theoretical framework for our hyperdrive efficiency improvements, added another technician. His students went on to design the navigation systems used throughout the fleet. Dr. Maria Santos created the psychological profiling algorithms that we use for diplomatic negotiations, said a third. The list went on and on. Human influence had permeated every aspect of Council civilization, often in ways so subtle that no one had noticed until it began to withdraw. They didn't conquer us, Prism of Truth realized with growing wonder and horror. They educated us. While the Council had been focused on maintaining their technological advantages through secrecy and restriction, humanity had been sharing knowledge so freely that it became indispensable. Every major system in Council space now relied on human innovations, human insights, human ways of thinking about the universe. Now, as those systems degraded and failed, the alternative was becoming clear. The species that humanity had contaminated with their knowledge were thriving. Their technology was advancing rapidly, their coordination was flawless, and their capabilities were expanding at an exponential rate. Reports from the frontier worlds painted a picture of unprecedented prosperity. The Cooperative, as the alliance of former primitive species called itself, had eliminated poverty on dozens of worlds. Disease was being eradicated through medical technologies that combined innovations from multiple species. Artistic and cultural achievements were reaching new heights as different civilizations shared their unique perspectives. They're not just more advanced than us, Vexta reported after a reconnaissance mission to cooperative space. They're happier. The observation stung because it was so obviously true. Council civilization was built on hierarchy, competition, and the careful hoarding of advantages. Citizens knew their place, followed their designated roles, and rarely questioned the system that governed their lives. In contrast, the cooperative worlds buzzed with innovation and creativity. Citizens of different species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the rigid specialization of council society. New forms of art emerged from the fusion of alien perspectives. Scientific breakthroughs happened weekly as researchers shared knowledge freely across species barriers. Perhaps, suggested Counselor Deep Thought Swimming of the cerebral Nephri species, we should consider opening diplomatic relations with this cooperative. The suggestion sparked heated debate. Some council members saw negotiation as the path to survival. Others viewed it as an unacceptable surrender to primitive species that should still be under council authority. We are the Galactic Council, declared Granite That Speaks with characteristic stubbornness. We have governed this galaxy for over a millennium. We do not negotiate with our subjects. But are they still our subjects? Asked Deep Thought Swimming. Do we still govern them if they refuse to acknowledge our authority? The question cut to the heart of the Council's dilemma. Their power had always been based on the assumption that they were the most advanced, most capable species in the galaxy. Now that assumption was crumbling. We could rebuild, suggested the Crixth delegate. Develop our own quantum computing systems. Reassert our technological superiority. In 2 centuries, Prism of Truth reminded them, while the cooperative continues to advance at an exponential rate, the mathematics were stark. Even if the Council could eventually replace their human-designed systems, they would be centuries behind a civilization that was already more advanced than they were. There is another option, Prism of Clarity said quietly. All attention turned to the young technician. We could ask them to teach us. The suggestion was so radical that several council members began to speak at once, their voices creating a cacophony of objection and outrage. The idea that the ancient powers of the galaxy should humble themselves to learn from their former subjects was almost incomprehensible. But as the debates raged and the reports of system failures continued to mount, one fact became increasingly clear. The galaxy had changed. The old order was dying, and somewhere beyond the rim of council space, humanity watched and waited to see what the council would choose: adaptation or extinction. The transmission came without warning on every screen, every display, every communication device in council space. Ambassador Chen Wei appeared exactly as he had 18 months earlier when he departed the council chambers, wearing the same simple black suit, displaying the same calm expression. But behind him, visible through what appeared to be a vast, transparent wall, was something that made even the ancient council members gasp in wonder. Stars. Not the distant points of light seen from planetary surfaces, but massive burning spheres suspended in space like jewels in an infinite necklace. The space station from which Chen Wei spoke seemed to exist in the void between galaxies, surrounded by cosmic architecture that dwarfed anything the council had ever imagined. Honored counselors, Chen Wei began, his voice carrying the same respectful tone he had used in their last meeting. I hope this message finds you well. In the council chambers, emergency alarms had been silenced so that the leadership could listen. Prism of Truth stared at the impossible vista behind the human ambassador, trying to understand what it was seeing. We have been monitoring developments in council space with great interest, Chen Wei continued. We understand that you have encountered some technical difficulties following our departure. We also understand that many species formerly under council jurisdiction have chosen to pursue alternative arrangements. That was a diplomatic way of describing the complete collapse of council authority across half the galaxy, Prism of Truth thought grimly. We want you to know that humanity has indeed complied with your directive, the ambassador said. We have withdrawn from council space exactly as you requested. We have been exploring alternatives. The view behind Chen Wei shifted, revealing glimpses of structures so vast they seemed to bend space around them, cities that floated in the void like artificial stars, ships that moved between dimensions rather than through normal space, gardens that existed in the hearts of nebulae, tended by beings of pure energy. In the 18 months since our departure, we have discovered that the universe is far larger and more wonderful than any of us had imagined. We have made contact with civilizations from other galaxies, learned from species that evolved in the hearts of stars, and formed partnerships with entities that exist in states of matter we had never dreamed possible. The transmission showed brief glimpses of these wonders: crystalline beings larger than planets, communicating through gravitational waves, cloud consciousness that spanned light years and thought in geological time, machine intelligences that had transcended physical form entirely and now existed as pure information. We have learned much from our time in council space, Chen Wei said, the view returning to focus on his calm face. We learned that cooperation builds strength, that diversity creates resilience, and that knowledge shared freely multiplies rather than diminishes. We have carried these lessons far beyond your borders. Prism of Truth felt something like fear creeping through its crystalline consciousness. The council had believed themselves to be the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Now it seemed they were barely aware of the true scope of the universe. The network that you have discovered in your own galaxy is just one small part of something much larger, Chen Wei explained. For over a century, humanity has been reaching out to species across the galaxy cluster, offering friendship, knowledge, and cooperation to any who would accept it. The transmission showed star maps that made the Council's territorial charts look like sketches drawn by children. Thousands of species, millions of worlds, entire galaxies connected by networks of communication and trade that spanned distances the Council had thought impossible to cross. We never sought to conquer or control, the ambassador continued. We simply shared what we had learned and listened to what others could teach us. The result has been beyond our wildest expectations. Behind Chen Wei, the view expanded to show the true scope of humanity's new civilization. Not ships and space stations, but living worlds that moved between stars like cosmic nomads. Entire systems that had been converted into vast libraries, preserving the knowledge and culture of 1 million different species. Academies where beings from across the universe came to learn and teach. The species in your galaxy who have chosen to join the cooperative made that choice freely, Chen Wei said. They were not conquered or coerced. They were simply offered an alternative to the isolation and competition that has characterized galactic politics for so long. Prism of Truth understood now what the humans had really done. They hadn't attacked the Council's power directly. They had simply demonstrated that there was a better way to live, a better way to organize civilization. When given the choice between hierarchy and cooperation, between scarcity and abundance, between fear and hope, most species had chosen the human way. We understand that this transition has been difficult for the Council, Chen Wei acknowledged. Change is never easy, especially for institutions that have remained unchanged for so long. But we want you to know that humanity bears no grudge against the Council for your decision 18 months ago. The ambassador's expression softened, becoming almost paternal. In fact, we are grateful. Your ultimatum forced us to think beyond the boundaries of this galaxy, to reach further and dream bigger than we ever had before. You freed us from the limitations we had placed on ourselves. The irony was staggering. The Council's attempt to contain humanity had actually liberated them to achieve something far beyond what they could have accomplished within the confined politics of the galaxy. We know that many of you are struggling with failing systems and changing circumstances, Chen Wei said. We want you to know that help is available if you want it. The cooperative has extended an invitation to any Council species who wish to learn new approaches to the challenges you face. He paused, letting the offer hang in the cosmic void. This is not a demand for surrender or submission. It is simply an invitation to join a larger conversation about how civilization might evolve. Your experience and wisdom would be valuable additions to our growing understanding of what is possible. The transmission began to fade, but Chen Wei's final words came through clearly. The universe is vast, counselors, and there is so much more to discover than any of us realized. Humanity learned that lesson from our time with you, and we have carried it to the stars themselves. The choice of what comes next is yours. The screens went dark, leaving the Council chambers in silence. For a long time, no one spoke. The ancient powers of the galaxy sat in their floating platforms, contemplating what they had just witnessed. They had believed themselves to be the masters of cosmic civilization. Now they understood that they were barely aware of its true scope. Well, said Deep Thought Swimming finally, I suppose we have a decision to make. Prism of Truth looked around the chamber at its fellow Council members. Some faces showed anger, others fear, still others something that might have been wonder. The Zethkari Supreme Arbiter understood that this moment would define not just the Council's future, but the future of every species in the galaxy. They could cling to their old ways, insisting on their authority, even as their power crumbled around them. They could retreat into isolation, nursing their wounded pride while the universe moved on without them. Or they could do something that none of them had ever imagined possible. They could learn. Perhaps, Prism of Truth said slowly, light dancing through its crystalline form in patterns of uncertainty and hope. It is time for the Council to become students again. The words hung in the air like a bridge between what had been and what might yet be. Outside the chamber windows, ships moved through the orbital platforms in their orderly patterns, but the order felt different now, not the rigid hierarchy of the past, but the beginning of something new, something that might grow to span the stars themselves. The humans had departed in silence, and the Council had believed themselves victorious. Now they understood the truth. Sometimes legends exist because the truth is too extraordinary to believe, and the truth was that they had witnessed the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based not on conquest or control, but on the simple radical idea that all beings, no matter how different, had something to teach and something to learn. The age of the Council was ending. The age of the cooperative was just beginning.